So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special meeting where we'll be concluding IFIS third year of activities. The Israeli Forum was for Intelligence Studies was established in the beginning of the academic year of 2022, and it's indeed been a very interesting ride. So in this event today, we'll be launching a special issue of Intelligence and National Security dedicated to the subject of intelligence failures and strategic surprises. A special issue which I had the honor of editing with Shay Hershkovitz, who's also here with us. Sadly, Steve Marin wrote to me yesterday night that he won't be able to join us, so I apologize on his behalf. Um, before we begin, and we do have quite a lot on our plate this evening, I would like to, as is already a tradition, I would like to give you a brief review of our activities in the passing year, which, as I wrote here, was a very meaningful one with a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of interesting and pressing issues that our forum addressed. So I'd like to begin by again reminding everyone our mission of advancing intelligence research and education in Israeli academia. This is what we are what we aim for, and we do so by creating this platform, this forum for knowledge sharing and collaboration among Israeli scholars, both within Israel and abroad. Now, we have this year over 120 registered members. I checked today, I would say that it's about 60% of them are pretty active and participating in the forum actively, and we are also maintaining the two-thirds of our members coming from academia, so students, graduate students, and of course faculty. And we also were able to slightly raise the number of women that are part of the forum as well. So the recognizable number of 35. This year we had 12 sessions, so it's a bit more than previous years because of the special webinar series that we had during May. So that's also this balance between in-person meetings and virtual meetings. So we had four in-person meetings and overall eight virtual meetings, including this one, with also a higher average rate of participants per session. So we had 42, whereas last year we had only an average of 30 participants per session. We also covered a range of topics. Obviously, our aim is to address the issues or the topics, the problems that October 7th failure raised, and also the war that ensued with its complexities. So we address the issue of intelligence policy relations, also intelligence reform, intelligence culture and discourse, on which we also, I should say, had our book launch event of the books of Itai Shapira and Meir Finkel. And also, we touched upon the issue of diversity in the intelligence as part of also our understanding of some of the causes or some of the things that can be fixed after the failure. And we discussed the topic of intelligence of non-state actors, particularly Hamas's intelligence, again through this book launch of Nati Flammer's book, Hamas Intelligence War Against Israel. We had quite a big array of Israeli speakers coming from all universities and also colleges in Israel and think tanks. And we were able this year to also have quite a sizable number of international speakers. Last year it was pretty hard to find speakers, and most of them came from the U.S. This year it was a bit more diverse. But I would just note here that we would still like to have also more participants from what they call the global south, so looking eastward and south from here. Um, our special webinar series, as I said, discussed the issue of the intelligence, the crisis in intelligence policy relations, which is engulfing not just Israel, but also democracies worldwide, and especially the US. So this drew quite a lot of interest also from abroad, and you can see here the number of entries we had to our website during the time that we held the webinars. So I think about 500 or more entries to the website, an overall percentage of 52 participants, mostly from our community, but also members of the public and students and some international participants. We also held our section of intelligence studies at the Israeli Association for International Studies. This year we went down from 4 panels to 1, but this was kind of intentional because we wanted to give more room for, first of all, for us as intelligence scholars, also to engage the other scholars of international studies and political science within the conference itself, but also to give more prominence and more emphasis, perhaps, on our own conference coming this October. On social media, these are the numbers. We have about 1,300 followers, quite a lot of views on YouTube, mostly for the annual conference, the recordings from the previous annual conference, which I included here in these numbers, and again the visits to our website also come from this. And lastly, as I already mentioned, in October we will have our second annual conference again at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. This under this theme of intelligence transformations after failure. The call for papers is open until the end of this month, so please feel free to scan the QR code, visit our website, download the CFP. It's not just a call for papers, but also call for awards nominations. So we will be giving, for the third year, we will be giving awards for best books published in the field of intelligence studies this passing year, best peer-reviewed article, and the best graduate paper. So please, again, I encourage you to open the call for papers and submit, of course, to the conference. Hopefully, given the, I don't know how to call it, stabilizing security situation, we hope that we'll be able to hold a really international conference this year in Jerusalem. We already have some international keynote speakers. We already published the name of one, Professor Susanne Fischer from the Federal University in Berlin, and we'll be announcing more names shortly throughout the month. So please, again, I would like to encourage you to see the CFP and yeah, and join us in Jerusalem. Okay, so this was this brief review, and now I would like to go to our main course. So we are today launching a special issue. As I said in the beginning, Stephen Marin, the editor of Intelligence and National Security, was not eventually able to join us. So I can also say that I was hoping that some of the papers will already be published, but they're not. So we're launching a special issue which is not yet launched, not yet available, but it will be soon. So we will be giving you these appetizers today. So we have four presentations from the special issue on the subject of strategic surprises and intelligence failures. But first, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Shay Hershkovitz, who was the lead editor of the special issue. Dr. Shay Hershkovitz is an adjunct lecturer at Georgetown University's Department of Applied Intelligence, a senior analyst at RAND, and a senior research fellow at the Institute for the Research of the Methodology of Intelligence. Dr. Hershkovitz authored The Future of National Intelligence: How Emerging Technologies Reshape Intelligence Communities, published in 2022. Shay, the floor is yours to say a few words and present the special issue.
Thank you, Ofek, and I'm sorry. Thank you, Ofek. I'm very happy to be here today. Before I start, let me just say that the views I'll share today are my own. It's a privilege to speak with you and to introduce the thinking behind the new special issue of INS, focused on a question that has haunted scholars and practitioners for decades. Why do intelligence failures keep happening, and what can we do about it? So the issue was originally conceived as a reflection on the 15th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, one of the most iconic and deeply studied cases of strategic surprise in modern history. Our goal was to revisit the scholarship that emerged after 1973, works like by Handel and Levite and Kam and Ben Zvi and others, of course, and assess how the field of intelligence studies has evolved in its thinking about early warning and surprise. I'm sorry, I'm a bit under the weather today. But just as we began that process, history repeated itself. On October 7th, 2023, Israel, despite having one of the world's most sophisticated intelligence communities, was caught entirely off guard. The consequences were catastrophic. Many in the field now consider this to be a perfect failure, even more devastating than the 150 years ago. So we were left with a painful question. How, after 6 decades of studying warning failures, from Pearl Harbor to 9/11 to the Arab Spring, do states still get surprised in such dramatic and devastating ways? And after thousands of articles, dozens of reforms, and entire academic programs dedicated to preventing this very outcome, how does strategic surprise remain so persistent? In fact, the last few years have brought a string of such shocks. The rapid collapse of the US-backed Afghan government in 2021, Russia's miscalculated invasion to Ukraine in 2022, the October 7th attacks in 2023, and the sudden fall of the Assad regime just last year. Each of these events caught key actors off guard, and each has reignited fundamental debate about how early warning works or fails to work in real-world intelligence settings. As part of this project, I conducted a meta-analysis of the 150 most cited works on strategic surprise, and I looked at which events appear most frequently, how they are categorized, and what trends emerge. And what I found was sobering. Not only has the pace of strategic surprise not declined, it may actually be accelerating. More importantly, the scope of what counts as strategic surprise has broadened. It now includes pandemics, cyber attacks, insurgencies, state collapse, and not just conventional warfare. And yet one pattern endures. When surprise comes in the form of large-scale military attack, it almost always succeeds. That observation forces us to take a hard look at the assumptions that underlie early warning theory. At the heart of the literature are two core explanations for why surprise happens. First, the missing information thesis. Warning fails because the necessary intelligence wasn't available, or wasn't collected, or wasn't analyzed. And the second is the failure to act thesis. The warning was there, but wasn't believed, prioritized, or acted upon in time. Over the years, the field of intelligence studies has responded with different schools of thoughts. Some scholars, for example, Betts, have taken a fatalistic, if not pessimistic, view that surprise is inevitable, given the fog of uncertainty and the limits of human cognition. Others, let's call them the reformists, believe we can design better organizations and processes to reduce the odds of failure. And there have been real efforts to reform. And I will just mention one as an example. So since the early 80s, agencies have increasingly adopted structured analytic techniques, SATs, to counter bias. Influenced by behavioral science, these methods aim to systemize judgment and avoid intuitive errors. Think of the work of Hoyer and Tetlock, and of course others. These techniques have become standards in both training and education. But as I mentioned, the results are clear. Strategic surprises keep happening. We still see breakdowns, not just in analysis, but in how institutions manage ambiguity, absorb dissent, and adapt to fast-changing environments. And as Wallstatter reminded us more than 60 years ago, the problem isn't just lack of information. It is an inability to make sense of it. And in today's digital age, the problem has intensified. Early warning, especially at the strategic level, is increasingly less about gathering more information, and it is more about developing frameworks for sense making, understanding context, interpreting intent, recognizing the meaning of weak signals amid the noise. So our special issue tries to move the conversation forward. It brings together 9 contributions or 8 contributions across 3 main themes. First, conceptual and methodological foundations, including rethinking how we define failure and how we design warning systems. Second, organizational and cultural dimensions, examining how internal dynamics in intelligence agencies shape vulnerabilities to surprise. And 3, non-Western perspective, exploring intelligence failures beyond the usual focus on the US and Israel. And one of the key takeaways is that intelligence failure isn't one thing, it's layered. Strategic failures look different from operational or tactical failures. Failure in democratic intelligence services is not the same as failure in an authoritarian one. And what counts as success or even resilience varies dramatically depending on institutional context and political environment. Another insight is that we need to move beyond the binary success versus failure and beyond the wartime dichotomy. Intelligence isn't about delivering certainty. It's about reducing uncertainty enough to enable meaningful action. Sometimes the right call is made but ignored. Sometimes the warning arrives too late. Sometimes the political environment renders the warning useless. These are not just analytic failures. They are systemic ones. So what does this mean going forward? It means we need a new mindset, one that treats strategic surprise not a rare black swan, but as a persistent feature of the modern threat landscape. It means embracing complexity rather than oversimplifying it. And it means designing intelligence systems that can absorb shock, adapt under pressure, and recover quickly rather than trying futilely to predict the future. As this special issue shows, the persistence of intelligence failure isn't a sign that reform is impossible. It is a reminder that success requires constant rethinking of how we structure our institutions, how we train our analysts, and perhaps most importantly, how we align decision makers around what intelligence can and cannot do. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay. Right on time. Okay, so our first speaker will be Jonathan Proctor, who will be presenting his paper, Exploring the Meaning and Challenges of Early Warning. Jonathan Proctor is an analyst with the Department of Defense, currently assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff Directorate for Intelligence, J2. He earned his MA in International Relations from Creighton University in 2015 and was a senior research fellow and adjunct lecturer at the National Intelligence University from 2021 to 2023. I will share his presentation. There it is. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a little intimidating seeing working with people that I've been reading for years now. And then as more people popped in, I kept seeing more familiar names of, oh, I remember that person's article. So thank you very much for having me here today. As well, Dr. Riemer, Dr. Hershkovitz, thank you very much for your efforts in bringing this special edition forward. Disclaimer, as everybody else, many other folks have had to do. I am here in my own personal capacity today. My day job, I'm really more of a practitioner, but during my 2 years at NIU, I was able to really kind of hit that scholarship and the research element. This particular paper and my efforts toward it are really kind of part of almost that second persona as a researcher, where I can think hopefully a little more independently than I can in my regular office. And so with that, what I'd like to, if we can go to the next slide, for when it comes to kind of like the area that I have found most interesting in my research is definitions. The constant, so what do you mean when you say? And this has been, it's kind of one of the central questions I focused on. I did a research short while I was at NIU on this. And I can't read anything anymore without kind of immediately trying to figure out, all right, she uses that word. What exactly does she mean by that? And this is extremely frustrating for me in daily practice, particularly with strategic warning. At least within the US community and the Department of Defense, if you ask 5 people what they mean by strategic warning, you will get a minimum of 8 responses. And often they are completely and utterly different things. So strategic versus operational versus tactical has been a constant challenge. My other favorite one that has caused me more headaches than I'd like to admit is ambiguous versus unambiguous warning. Well, what exactly do we mean by that? The current research project I'm working on in the background is all about the indicator structured method and what's the difference between an indicator, a signpost, an observable, a collectible. In some schools, those mean completely different things. In other schools, those are all the exact same thing, just, with a thesaurus. And so what I wanted to look up this time was that idea of early warning, because what I started to realize was after a few years of doing this, I always assumed that early meant something very distinct from warning. It was a specific kind of subset. For me and for a lot of the people I work with, when you talk about warning, if you will, the early is implied. And so we would always say, oh, we're developing a warning system, we're doing warning products. And I would have other people say, yes, you're developing an early warning system, or, we need to do early warning. And I was always wondering, they seem to be using it the same way that I was, but at the same, or using early warning the same way that I was using warning. So I really wanted to look into what does early mean, and can we give it maybe perhaps a little more meaning or a little bit of more precision than we commonly have right now. So if you could pop me forward one more slide. So when you look at using just the term early warning, a lot of times, if you were to take that word and simply replace it with timely in books, in articles, the meaning stays very much the same. And I've always been fascinated by these basically find replace, that if you can take a document, find replace one word for another, and the meaning stays and the interpretation in the background is all exactly the same, I kind of find that interesting. And so in looking at early, I always thought that that was something, a very unique, a special subset of warning. But when you look at a lot of the literature, it seems to be, it's another way of saying timely. Warning needs to be timely in time. So I have one example here on the screen from Gentry and Gordon's book, which I essentially, let's flip out early, put in timing, works exactly the same. The other place I've seen you can do this, particularly within a lot of doctrine documents, is if you actually take the word warning and just substitute analysis. I have found it's a scary the number of publications, particularly in the U.S. intel community, where those are the exact same things. And so then when you try to get people to understand, well, what is warning, what's its purpose, they tend to just think, oh, well, that's analysis. They're the same thing. The other word that always gets in there is strategic, because again, that word is almost the bane of my existence. When you look at strategic, again, there's lots of different ways people interpret this. One interpretation is scale. Strategic is all about existential threats, or the scale of who you are briefing. Well, strategic warning goes to the president. Tactical warning goes to the warfighter. But then other folks will use strategic and they'll put time associations with it. So 6 months to 2 years is the kind of description you see in Gordon and Gentry's book on strategic intelligence warning. Months to years is what I have commonly seen at least in the U.S. Department of Defense. And so there is almost an assumption there. Well, then early warning kind of becomes strategic warning because that's what should be the earliest. Strategic comes before operational warning, which should be received before tactical warning. And so when you look at these things on the timeline, all of a sudden now you've got different words. And then when you start to break out, well, what about strategic early warning? We've got 3 words there. How do we give meaning to all of those? So if you can ask me one more slide. The idea that I decided to come up with on this is I wanted to take the idea that early could have a specific meaning. It could give you a little more precision in the language and see what that would mean. And the argument for doing this is if you take the idea of strategic early warning and allow both strategic and early to have very distinct meanings, separate from warning, you get a lot more precision in language. And what it also potentially allows you to do is to set up an ideal. So if you consider the idea that warning by definition is supposed to be timely, then we can look at early warnings as a subset of that. These are the earliest, the most timely. And the way that I wanted to try to define that was the idea of, we always talk about you want to eliminate, prevent, minimize, or mitigate damage. Can we look at early warning as these are the warnings that allow essentially the elimination of damage? So you eliminate the threat. It never even comes to pass. You completely prevent it. You stop the conditions that allow that threat to happen. You completely deter the adversary from attacking. Or, in much more tactical events, you can preempt the threat. And I would say the Israeli airstrike on the Egyptian Air Force going into 1967 is probably one of the best examples of that, where that early tactical warning, that early decision in a more tactical environment allowed you to take the initiative and to basically really change the outcome. So for the approach for this paper, I wanted to say, all right, can I do this, but also at different levels? And the inspiration here was, as a DoD person, I'm almost contractually obligated to continue to use strategic operational tactical. The work that I did at NIU, I very specifically said I do not want to use strategic operational tactical in any framework that I come up with because I want to get away from that. And I did that with what I call the 4 functions model. But if 2 years back in the Joint Staff has taught me anything, it's that I'm going to have to go back to strategic operational tactical if I want to be able to communicate well with the decision makers that I work with. And so kind of merged 2 approaches here. I've never been happy with a lot of discussions of strategic optional tactical, except for I do think Dr. Hershkovitz's 3-story building metaphor is probably one of the best out there. So essentially, and I realize, and I, very embarrassingly, very late to the game in finding this particular paper, way later in the literature review than I am comfortable acknowledging. But I took one thing away from that, and what is, I feel like the both of us came to very similar frameworks through totally different directions. So I decided to use this. And if you can go one more slide for me, what I'll kind of zip through here, because the details will be in the paper, is if you look at this at 3 different levels, I use his versions of strategic operational tactical, and then I kind of put in there a little bit of the work that I did at NIU with, so what are the tasks that you're accomplishing in each level? And what are very specifically the supported decisions? And then based on that, well, what does early mean at that level? So if we're looking at strategic early warning, with the idea of strategic being your task is to understand the environment that's out there, know all the threats, triage, really, allocate and do for decisions of allocating resources and what's your strategic approach going to be. Well, then your early criteria is this is a warning that even completely prevents the threat from occurring. This is the ability to stop the conditions from even approaching. And if we take that through the operational and tactical realms, which, and again, I'll leave a lot of that for the paper, but I think for early criteria, when we talk about deterring action, that's where we get in the operational time frame. You're able to recognize an adversary's mobilization enough, or recognize that the conditions for a threat are emerging enough so that you can essentially prepare. And again, the idea here is the adversary is now completely deterred. And then when you get down to the tactical realm here, it's really enabling preemption. It's no longer about just getting people to bunkers in time, just getting people, for the US recently, out of the way in the floods in time, but completely be able to preempt everything, either through your emergency systems or essentially through a preemptive attack. If you can go one last slide for me. So challenge to this is, it kind of works, but I almost wonder if we've kind of created here potentially an ideal that we can't realize. The challenges of actually trying to make this happen, to be as early as possible at any level of that 3-story building, is you're going to be working at the extreme edge of uncertainty. And then even if you're successful, particularly in the strategic realm, now you've got self-fulfilling prophecies, the paradox of warning. You warn, action is taken, that threat never materializes, but then it looks like, well, great, there was no threat that was ever there. I just spent thousands of dollars, and tons of time and resources moving troops to blunt an attack that never came. And so, in the spirit of Mike Handel and others, I came up with what I felt was the paradox of early warning. This is potentially the most successful type of warning in that it just eliminates the damage, but it's the least likely to actually be either one, listened to, or even if it's successful, even acknowledged as that. And so you almost end up with this paradox. The most successful form of warning you can have is actually going to be the least likely to be successful in the end or recognized as that. And with that, I think my time is kind of through, so I will pass off to the next presenter.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan, both for the presentation and for being on time. Appreciate that. Okay, our next presenter is Professor Ron Hassner. Will be presenting his work, How to Deceive a Supply-Side Approach. Ron Hassner is a Chancellor's Professor of Political Science and the Helen Diller Family Chair in Israel Studies at UC Berkeley. Additionally, he is the editor-in-chief of the journal Security Studies and the editor of the Cornell University Press book series Religion and Conflict. His work focuses on territorial disputes, religion in the military, conflicts over holy places, the pervasive role of religion in the modern battlefield, and on the politics of interrogational torture. Ron, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well, and thank you for initiating both the special issue and today's conversation. It's an honor to be among distinguished speakers. I'm only slightly, I think, out of my depth, but I am out of my depth. Intelligence is not my main topic of analysis, though I've published significantly on it. It is perhaps because I come to the topic as an outsider that I noticed a trend in the literature, which I think was also very apparent in Shay's excellent summary of the literature, and that is that discussions of failure are almost all focused on the recipient, on what I would call the demand side of surprise, or in the case of my paper, deception. And so what I wanted to do in my paper is to shift the focus to the supply of deception, which is why I called my paper How to Deceive. We, I think quite rightly and quite logically, focus on the failures of the organization that led to disaster. I think this is completely natural and laudable, nor is the argument I'm about to present a contradiction to the existing literature, but I think it might be an interesting supplement to ask not just how did this organization screw it up, how should it do better, but also what did the deceiver do in order to maximize their odds of success. And I'm going to make three connected arguments. The first is that deceiving is actually a lot harder than our literature would lead us to believe. It takes a good deal of work. And when deception is successful, and I mention many cases in the paper, it is not just the result of dumb luck and or the incompetence of the target, but it is the result of tremendous effort, investment in time, personnel, resources, and complexity of the supplier of deception. That'll be my first argument, and I'm going to explain what I mean in a second. Directly related to this, when deceptions are simple, they often fail. And our literature has not done a good job of talking about deception failure. In fact, there is this sort of built-in assumption, and you'll see this in quotes from Betts and many others, that deception doesn't fail. In fact, I think Betts says straight out that it's very hard to think of a single case in which someone attempted to deceive and did not succeed. And I show that the contrary is true in my paper, and that deceptions fail when they are simple. And again, explanation forthcoming. And then the third thing I'd like to talk about very briefly is that it can be very hard to separate those two things, the ingenuity of the deceiver and the pathology of the deceived. Often it's both. Often they rely on one another. But I think the second part, what I call the supply of deception, is often missing from the conversation. You've heard a lot in the aftermath of October 7 about the various mistakes, and there were many mistakes, that Israeli intelligence made. You have not heard very often about the ingenuity of Hamas. Those two are related to each other. They're in a strategic relationship. But I think it's worth focusing on the first, because in many ways it turns the logic of the other on its head. So what's the logic we're familiar with? Intelligence organizations are too skeptical, too unwilling to change their ways, too unwilling to question assumptions, too incrementalist. I don't think that's a coincidence. And others before me have acknowledged the fact that this skepticism, incrementalism, serves a very good and very important purpose. And in fact, I would argue, poses an obstacle most of the time to good deception. If you wish to deceive an organization that double checks every warning indicator and correlates it with other warning indicators, you are going to have to deceive it on multiple fronts. And I call that part of my argument webs of deception. Successful deception, historically speaking, did not target one aspect of intelligence. It targeted 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them. The cases I look at in the paper are primarily Allied deception in World War II. These are well-known cases, much analyzed, very easy to discuss. You will know many of the names. Nonetheless, many of them, I think, are misrepresented as single hits of ingenuity. How brilliant was it to allow the corpse of a alleged British airman to wash up on the shores of Spain, and how foolish were the Germans to believe that the documents that this airman had with him were authentic. That's the famous mincemeat ruse, and that's just a misrepresentation of what happened. These documents and this very carefully planned ruse of the dead, washed-up corpse were part of a much more elaborate series of deceptions that had to do with false troop movements, double agents, signals sent that were designed to deceive, movement of equipments and funds, leaks through diplomatic staff and the media, to which the Germans then turned when they encountered this single deception in order to confirm or disconfirm its accuracy. And in this case, and in many other cases, there was tremendous skepticism on the receiving side. It was not that the German Abwehrdienst merely sort of keeled over and fell on its face in the face of this ruse, but rather they sought to confirm and disconfirm by looking at other sources. And since deception was aimed at those other sources, they thought they were able to confirm. And nonetheless, skepticism is evident at each and every stage. So that's my first lesson, is deception is hard, it's expensive. If it is to be done well, it must target SIGINT, human, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lesson number 2, when you don't do that, it often fails. And again, there's a nice long list of cases in my paper, some of which you may already be familiar with. The story of the false General Montgomery, who was sent to Gibraltar in order to again deceive the Axis about the timing and the location of D-Day, fails to persuade. And it fails to persuade because there are no other deceptions that back up this deception. In fact, other deception efforts contradict this deception. And because the Germans and their allies are very, very careful to correlate information, it becomes very quickly apparent to them that this is not to be believed. So that's lesson number 2. Simple deceptions often fail. It is not the case that pathologies of intelligence gathering expose these organizations to such weaknesses that any attempt to fool them will immediately succeed. And then lesson number 3 is it can be very hard to tell whether successful deception is the result of ingenuity of the supplier or problems with the recipient. So there's a lively debate around the Yom Kippur War. Most Israeli analysts argue that the Egyptians did not try very hard to deceive, and that it was almost entirely Israeli pathologies that explained the outcome. I find that unpersuasive. And I think there's, again, a persuasive list of Egyptian efforts: human intelligence, visible intelligence, movement of troops, chatter online, leaked headlines to the newspapers, diplomatic correspondence, that all helped bolster the surprise attack in October 73. I'll conclude by saying that I found the story of the Trojan War very inspiring here, and I turn to it time and again in the paper. When we tell the story about the Trojan horse, we tell it as a story of Trojan stupidity. How could they be so stupid? Why wouldn't they look inside a horse that is very obviously hollow and very large and very strange? Why did they not listen to the warnings? And I think the term Cassandra paradox, which I use in the paper, is helpful here. The Greeks who designed the horse didn't just drop a horse in front of the city gates. They surrounded it with explanations, with signs, with human intelligence, with visible troop movements, all of which the Trojans could use to corroborate whether this was or was not a threat. The Cassandra paradox suggests that the more surprising, it comes closely to something Jonathan just talked about, that the more surprising and unexpected the source of intelligence is, the less one should believe it, because it cannot be corroborated. And I think this has all sorts of implications for intelligence gathering. But the main lesson I want to send people home with is, despite guilt and despite shock, I don't think that one ought to respond to intelligence failure by looking only at the demand side, at the recipient. I think one should dedicate significant attention to studying the efforts that the instigator has invested in deceiving. That does not remove any blame from the recipient side, but I think enriches the analysis.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ron, for this insightful presentation. Next speaker is Elena Grossfeld, who will be presenting her work with Dr. Hugh Dillon, Unveiling Russian Intelligence Failures in the Ukraine Conflict, a Strategic Culture Perspective. Elena is a PhD candidate in the Department of War Studies, King's College London, and a member of King's Intelligence and Security Group. Her research interests are strategic culture of Russian/Soviet intelligence, Cold War, and information warfare. Elena, over to you.
Thank you. It's really great to be the last to present, or at least after the distinguished speakers, because then I can, poach their ideas to supplement my presentation. So thank you very much. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, everybody was stunned. Stunned from the chutzpah, but also stunned from the failure. Seeing the Russian army basically stuck in the mud with no gas, with, breaking down trucks and all multiple, inability to communicate and whatnot. And we looked at it with Dr. Hugh Dillon and Dr. David Geo, and thought, how could Russian intelligence, which is known for its, prowess and abilities, could have failed so badly? And then we wrote an article about the failure and the autocrat's intelligence paradox, which was doubly surprising because President Putin, being an intelligence officer in his youth or, early life, should have been better prepared to assess the intelligence. But then we looked at it again, and a lot of the explanations very neatly fit into the strategic culture of Russian intelligence as the underlying explanation for those failures. And so in this article, we're looking at how strategic culture can explain all those issues. So the failures were on multiple levels. So there was a strategic miscalculations about the Ukrainian resistance, and there were tactical failures in military operations. And the Russian leadership both military and President Putin were not prepared by the developments and were caught off guard. And to explain this is one main feature stands out is that Russian intelligence and Russian military and Russian society in general has a reluctance to provide unwelcome news to political leaders. And this is one of the main explanations for this failure. And it will also be the hardest to fix if the Russian leadership decided they wanted to go that route. And this feature is present along the history of Soviet and Russian intelligence. And the explanation for this continuity is also quite simple. There was no organization, there was no meaningful reform after the collapse of the Soviet Union in intelligence organizations. The reform was superficial, mostly from KGB. There was split into a number of organizations. There was no reckoning with the Soviet past. There was no little truth and no reconciliation, as we found out. There was also continuity in people. And at some point, the Russian intelligence organizations became sort of family business. Family members would bring their young generation and have them join. And there was also a continuity of the Chekist ethos, which helped maintain the strategic culture. And one of its core features is the view of the besieged fortress, that Russia is a victim of external aggression and subversion. And the 1990s Western engagement reinforced this mindset. And Russia and its leaders saw itself as under a cultural assault, democracy, human rights, LGBTQ, were all seen as deliberate subversion. And even the existence of the Western values were interpreted as a continuation of covert war. And Russian intelligence saw itself as the true guardians of real Russia. Mark Galeotti famously defined it as spookocracy, which is cemented intelligence strategic culture as the corner of Russian governance. And the key features initially were the siege mentality, the besieged fortress, the conspiratorial mindset, the command culture, the inflexibility of the command, and again, the unwillingness to deliver bad news, and the primacy of intelligence. Thank you, Dr. Yakov Falkov, for your excellent article from 2021, I believe. And to that, there is the added layer of endemic corruption, which became pervasive in Russian intelligence after the Soviet collapse, and created the blurred lines between organized crime and state security, and the pervasive economic and political corruption. The additional reinforcement to that were the lack of any meaningful supervision of intelligence organizations. So when comparing to Cold War, there was even a weaker oversight because the Politburo was gone. The consequences for stepping out of line were equally, if not more, severe. There were many financial incentives to maintain the status quo. And the intellectual corruption and financial corruption created this merge of incentives. In case of Ukraine, the cultural elements were paired with specific failures in Ukraine. So besieged fortress mentality was leading to assumption of Western encirclement. The primacy of intelligence led to the fact that FSB-led war plan was never shared or meaningfully countered by the GRU or the military. And regime assumptions were used as the magnetic north. So the fact that the Russian president thought that there is no Ukrainian statehood was accepted as a fact. And again, the hierarchy and the command structure, the reports were tailored towards what the management expects or the commanding officer expects. And loyalty in Russian case was always valued over professionalism. And again, endemic corruption, because intelligence collection in Ukraine, for example, the money that was allocated to FSB was spent, among other things, on trips to Thailand and, other nice features that are not necessarily, producing intelligence value. And we can see that command culture was very, very picturesquely shown in the Narishkin moment when in 2 days, I believe, before the Ukraine invasion, Putin had a collection of high-ranking people talking about the proposal of, going over Ukraine. And Sergei Narishkin, the chief of SVR, apparently did not show enough enthusiasm for the president's proposal, and he received a very televised dressing down and was told to stop mumbling and, to tell what the president wants to hear. So if anyone had any illusion about the possibility of countering the official narrative, I think it was buried at this point, if not before. And again, in case of Ukraine, it was not the lack of information, and it was not a lack of analysis, but it's like this biblical quote of they have eyes, but they shall not see. So this quote is used in Bible, in the Old Testament, the fact that, the false idols cannot see. In the New Testament is that people who are seeing the information cannot interpret it. In this case, people who saw the information did not want to share it with those who could make any difference. And so, it was smooth sailing until it wasn't. And again, this is all part of historical continuity. Those are the features of Russian intelligence. Those are not bugs. There are not much change from 1941 when there were warnings about the impending Operation Barbarossa. And Galeotti in 2019 said that in the senior level, the difference between 1941 and 2022 is that you don't bring bad news to the Tsar's table. So again, everybody is encouraged to overstate their success, to hide their weaknesses or failures, to blame the failure on conspiracies. And analysis was never a strong part of Soviet and Russian intelligence, because the idea was that if you have the information, there is no need for analysis, because you might get it wrong anyways. And so the purpose of Russian intelligence is less in analysis and strategic warning, and more in doing, not thinking, but more doing. So stealing secrets, they're great. Passing information, also good. Doing things, perfect. Hunting Putin's enemies, there's no, no doubt about that. But they're not very good at critical questions, at challenging assessments, delivering bad news, and objective analysis. And the implications are that strategic culture is revealing that deep structural problems in Russian intelligence are not going to go away, and the reform is very difficult because the roots are deep, and similar failures are very likely. And those are systemic vulnerabilities that the system must take into account in order to continue function. And the failures were not inevitable, but they were predictable when looking at strategic culture. And a besieged fortress mindset and reluctance to change authority create conditions that could have prevented the failure, but they did not. And strategic culture is, we think, is a very useful approach to look at intelligence failures and successes in this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. Thank you. All right. So last presentation will be mine. If I didn't say before, so after my presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A. And then a few concluding remarks from Kuperwasser and Professor Barnathan. Okay. So yeah, I should say that except for being the coordinator of this forum, I'm also a postdoctoral fellow with the Leonard Davis Institute for International Relations at the Hebrew University and a visiting fellow at Leiden University's Institute for Security and Global Affairs. So in his review of Janice Gross-Stein's article on October 7th failure, intelligence scholar Joshua Rovner concludes, finally, it is important to watch what younger Israeli military and intelligence officers take from their experiences before October 7. And then Rovner goes on to say to mention a few possibilities. So one, that they become disillusioned and leave the organizations. Second is that they remain, but they make no effort to change the organization. And third is that they stay, but they make an effort to improve the quality of intelligence. Now, this is exactly what intrigued me. This is the question that I set to explore. And we have to admit that we know quite a lot about the causes of failure. We know something about the consequences of failure, but mainly on the macro level, so organizational, political reforms, etc. But we know very little about the individual level impact of failures on intelligence organizations. And in April 2024, I had a rare window of opportunity where I could interview graduates of IDF intelligence directorates, so IDI here and after, basic training in intelligence analysis. This is an annual course going on for over 30 years, and I interviewed the graduates of the 30th class, which was the first class to take place after October 7. I interviewed 14 graduates, accounting for a quarter of the class, 12 women and 2 men, which is roughly a representation of the demographics of this class. New recruits are in a particularly sensitive position where they can decide to either quit or stay, and if they stay, they account for the future of the intelligence community, as can be seen in this quote by former IDI chief Khaliva. So I organized my findings around 3 main themes: the impact of October 7th on, first, their motivation and will to serve; second, their learning and professional lessons; and third, on their psyche. So I would say that to protect the interview's privacy and personal safety, all quotes that I will give here are presented under pseudonyms. So in terms of motivation, although all of them experienced self-doubts and external criticism, they also expressed high motivation to serve as intelligence analysts and also expressed pride in joining IDI and the Research and Analysis Division, here and after RED. So when I asked them a closed question, to what extent are you proud of joining RED, 85% to a very great extent, and 15% said to a great extent. So what allowed them this, this esprit de corps after this organization had hit its biggest failure? So first of all, some of them had no concern to begin with. Others just, for them, October 7 underscored the importance of having good intelligence. So as Maya said, seeing how bad things get when it doesn't work made me realize how significant it is when it does. So I have to say this only increased my motivation. For others, knowing stuff that others don't and appreciating the complex nature of intelligence work with its ups and downs, given the particular insider's perspective that they gained once they joined the course, succinctly put by Veled. For me, it was simply meaningful knowing things that people at home do not. And third, and perhaps most important, is their attempt to dissociate themselves from the generation of failure. So previous generations who failed, and speaking about themselves as a new generation, the generation of change, or as Batel put it, we are new blood. We need to learn from the mistakes, come more prepared, more on top of things. We need to lead RED forward. In terms of learning and professional lessons, I will skim this for the benefit of time. Obviously, they had doubts concerning the staff, the lectures, and also the curriculum, the program of the course. But they eventually came to realize three things. One, that intelligence analysis is a profession with best practices and ethics that they simply need to learn. Second is that their success depends on their deep commitment to learning. So just investing a lot in learning the basics about, the Middle East, about intelligence practices, so structured analytic techniques, etc. And third, that erring is human and that intelligence failures are inevitable. However, although they appreciate that mistakes happen and failures are inevitable, they cannot happen to them. So I noticed two notable scars, so to speak. One was this very heavy sense of responsibility, and I think that the most prominent example is given in Hannah's quote. In Hannah's story, Hannah was besieged with her family on that Saturday in one of the kibbutzim on the Gaza envelope, and then she immediately joined the course. And she said, "I think that the hardest part for me is this feeling that I have to prove myself, because I lost trust in the intelligence, the IDF, and the state. There's Hannah from the kibbutz, whose name I redacted for anonymity, who the IDF and the state didn't protect, and the intelligence didn't protect. And there's Hannah in the intelligence, who now bears responsibility to protect these people. So there's a kind of obligation to prove." And the second thing is, the second scar is what we call alarmism, or what they called conceptophobia. So this fear of getting trapped in a conception, this ominous word from 1973. So all the graduates I talked to mentioned one particular exercise that goes on for years and simulates the Yom Kippur surprise. Trainees go through several rounds of reading intelligence reports, and their concern for a potential war is supposed to grow as they read, while instructors that come especially for this exercise are supposed to represent senior officers and decision makers of that time, and are supposed to question and dismiss the conclusions of the trainees. And what happened this time, according to their accounts, is that the trainees immediately said on the first round that there's going to be war. And the instructors were kind of helpless and simply mean to all of them, and they kind of laughed at the whole situation. And as Kalmit put it simply didn't work, because we experienced October 7. When an exercise is meant to teach you not to get caught up in a conceptia, and you're so not in a conceptia, because October 7 just happened a while ago, then it doesn't work as it should. In fact, it might even have the opposite effect, leading everyone to say that there's going to be war. So to conclude, what I found was, actually to my surprise, was that all of them had high motivation to join and serve as intelligence analysts, and a strong sense of the mission that they were assigned to, and also recognition, at least in words, and at this very onset, recognition of the tools and the norms of the profession. This is potentially positioning them as norm setters within the organization. However, they face several risks and challenges. First is the risk that they will be or re-socialized into the pre-existing organizational culture of overconfidence, hubris, non-professionalism, etc. Second is that they a second challenge, and now it's been a year since I made these interviews, and I'm hearing about it, that they have this actually a challenge of accepting their superiors as professional authorities. And lastly is what we already know from, I think, from the literature, is this risk of overlearning, which I understood it as first this potential risk of alarmism, but also this perhaps a false sense of immunity from failure, which in itself can I think lead to failure. So I will stop here and we'll open this to discussion. Thank you to all the contributors for presenting today. I will just mention the other articles that that will be featuring in these on this special issue. So we have The Vanishing Watchman: The Rise and Decline of Early Warning by Udi Elan, who's here with us, Ofek Riemer and David Simantov. All of them are here this evening. We have to deprive the enemy of the advantage of surprise. Analysis is a panacea for military and intelligence failures in early Soviet intelligence theory by Yakov Falkov, whose name I also saw here. And did I skip something? No. And we have one more article who's kind of delayed and is in the final stages of review. All right. So if you have a question or a comment on the presentations, please raise your hand. And we already have Danny. Go ahead.
So thanks, Professor Hassner, for a fascinating talk. I want to ask you specifically about Pearl Harbor, because all of us who learned about Pearl Harbor read Roberta Waldstätter's classic study on noise and signals. But recently, I read a recent contribution, I just forgot the name of the authors, that actually said that Waldstätter was wrong. That the problem here was not signals drawn out in the noise, but that the Japanese were so skillful in information security on the way to Pearl Harbor that were actually not enough signals. I just wonder what you think about it, whether you think that Waldstätter's theory still holds or not.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I haven't studied this case, Dan, so I really can't comment on it. But I would be amazed if the Japanese invested the majority of their air power and naval power in a single massive stroke without backing that effort up with various deception efforts. And we know of some of those deception efforts. In other words, it simply can't be that this was 100% American failure. It doesn't make any sense. So the interesting question becomes, is it 95% American failure? Is it 50% Japanese ingenuity and 50% American failure? I think there's something to be studied there, because some deception efforts are smarter, more sophisticated, better than others. We do know, for example, about the Japanese, that they made an effort to deceive the Americans as to where their primary aircraft groups were. We know that they attempted diplomatic talks in parallel in order to sort of throw the Americans off balance, a little in the way in which Bibi and Trump behaved in relation to Iran in the past few weeks. But I have to admit, Dan, I don't know the case well enough to respond to your question.
Thanks.
Elena. And
Yes,
please,
the
if you have
question is
questions,
for
raise your virtual hands. Go ahead.
the question is actually for you. And my question is, there were multiple publications after the October 7th failure, how the warnings of intelligence analysts and observers were ignored, and the imbalance of power, usually female, young, that their warnings were not heeded to. Was there any effort to teach the analysts in how to operate within that framework, how to maybe how to escalate or how to treat superior officer that is tearing your ideas apart or stuff like that, and whether the analysts that you interviewed expressed any concerns about the fact that people on the ground did issue warnings and nobody actually gave a shit.
Yeah, thank you for this. So we have with us Professor Ayelet Harel, who can also say something about these narratives of people not being listened to and how it associates to gender, whether or not it associates to that. I can say from the research that I did, that they put a lot of emphasis on ethics and values of intelligence analysts, and talked a lot about, first of all, humility, and second of all about standing by your opinions, by your reading of the material. And also gave them some very, practical advices, like pick your battles. If you have this report and a superior is changing a word or something like that, then don't pick a fight on this. unless it's the word that makes all the meaning around it, and then you should go ahead and again, from what I hear, they are, when they join the organization, they have been quite vocal and present. So I can only hope that, you know, again, they keep on with that and do that. They did put a lot of stress on that. And if Alice wants to say something, you're welcome. Do we have any more questions or comments?
Do you want me to refer to the question about
Yeah,
this
sure,
topic?
sure. Go ahead.
So I'm not a part of this special issue, but I have conducted
That's unfortunate.
a documentation project about the war rooms and the soldiers serving in the war rooms that were actually observing the front and sending all kinds of signals and warning about what's happened behind the border fence. And many, many warnings were given since April. And what was interesting is that the narrative in the public sphere and also in the media was that actually everybody was silencing the lookouts and the field observers and so on and so forth. And what me and my two partners found actually was that their warnings were discussed. They were discussed by high command officers and also by political figures. And that was even more troubling. And also what we found is that warnings were brought up from both men and women. So it's not only the fact that it was, you know, for lower ranked soldiers and so on. And also what we found in this project, it's related to Ron's presentation, was about the deception of Hamas. You know, we interviewed soldiers, all kinds of fronts and not intelligence, all kinds of soldiers. And actually, they told us, what? We didn't expect them to strike on Saturday. Like, what do you mean Saturday? I mean, it's not a regular day for us. You know, all these demonstrations were held on Friday afternoon. So actually, Hamas was smarter, much, much, much smarter than the IDF. And also, it's not about this kind of deception. It was like in many, many, many levels that we can, like we observed in our documentation about the deception of Hamas and the specific strategic that they made. So I completely agree with what you said, Ron, about this, but I'm not gonna steal more time, please.
Thank you, Ayelet. Galia, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This was really interesting. I have more of a thought for Ofek. It will be really interesting to follow these people and like interview them again in 5 years or a decade, because it can be like a natural experiment to see the impact of the culture, the system, the socialization into the system as they move up the ranks. It's really curious. I wonder if it's possible to interview people from the intelligence who were, 18 in 1973. That's still like a pre-dementia age. So it'll be interesting to see whether you had similar reactions of young intelligence soldiers at the time, and what happens over time when you after you think you've learned. And the second, just a thought for sort of combining Elena and Ron. I wonder if Elena talked about the impact of strategic culture on intelligence failures. I wonder if there is a connection between strategic culture and your ability to be a good deceptor also, in terms of ingenuity and and things like that. So that's another angle that sort of connects the two papers together. But that's another issue. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone want to comment, Elena?
Yeah. So actually, it's really interesting, but the whole Russian and Soviet strategic culture, not only intelligence, but also military, is built on deception as a keystone of any operation, whether long-term, short-term, or very long-term. And I don't know if Dima Adamski is here today, but he wrote in his book about maskirovka and other approaches. And this is more, it's one of the traits that was developed throughout history, where you're not strong enough to, come in full force and just fight it out like a man, but instead you are forced to conceal your strength and maybe front your weaknesses to lure the adversary into a position that will play at the end into your hands. So yes, very much so. Deception is part of strategic culture.
Okay, thank you. I don't see Ron here, but I can just say that one of the things that motivated this research was actually a podcast by the Institute for the Research of the Methodology of Intelligence, where they had a veteran of Yom Kippur, someone who joined Amman, the IDI, right after the surprise attack in 1973. And the only thing that he said was that I joined a post-traumatic organization, and he couldn't really recollect more than that or elaborate what it really means. So I said, okay, I have to hit it now and do this and tap into this now. So if that's all, I
By the
would
way,
like.
Ofek, other similar research, is there any similar research done about American intelligence?
Yeah, so there is one very famous work by Rob Johnston, who did an ethnography of U.S. Intelligence analysis community. He started collecting his data, and he did several hundreds of interviews 4 days before September 11. But still, the attack and the surprise did not really feature in his. He was really focused on the practices and what does it mean to do intelligence. So what you can actually see there is that it kind of shifted the focus more on tactical reports, on immediate warnings, immediate reports, not much strategic thinking. But it wasn't really focused on understanding how September 11 impacted the intelligence community. And there are also other ethnographies by Bridget Nolan that were done a decade later, trying to see how the reforms that the U.S. Administration tried to push forward, how they featured in the intelligence by doing this ethnography. But it's not really it's not immediate impact. So yeah, there are very few works, and they're not really centered on this question. And while we have you not on mute, Kuper, so I will hand the floor to you. I would like the whole idea for establishing an Israeli association dedicated to intelligence studies came out of the Institute for the Research of the Methodology of Intelligence, headed by Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser. And today we also enjoy the support of the Leonard Davis Institute, directed by Professor Barnathan. So I would like you both to say perhaps a few concluding remarks before we go each to our separate ways. So Galia, if you'd like to start.
Okay, I will be very brief. I largely want to thank Ofek for, I think a lot of what you call it IFIS, right? The Israeli Forum for Intelligence Studies has, managed to do in the past 3 years, as you presented very nicely at the beginning, is in large part thanks to your very, very sort of dedicated work. So I want to thank you for that. And that's the supply side. The demand side is really, I think there is a lot of interest in these fields, and surprisingly, for me at least, I'm not an intelligence scholar. Surprisingly, in Israel, this is not a very well-developed academic field, not in international relations or elsewhere. And I'm happy that the Institute is able to try to help push forward this linking knowledge, bottom-up knowledge on the ground and academic work to try to forward this academization of intelligence studies in Israel. And I'm very happy to see all these international faces here. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other. And I invite you all to either apply to the conference in October or just attend. And I invite you all to come up with initiatives to cooperate. There's so much to learn, and we're so busy with our own problems usually that lifting our heads and looking around and talking to other people is extremely, extremely important these days. So thank you, and thank you, Kuperwasser, for this cooperation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Galia, and thank you, Ofek. I think that what we have proven today, again and throughout this year, is how vital this initiative is. And I'm very proud of being involved in establishing it. It's on behalf of the Institute for the Research and Methodology of Intelligence. We are all happy, I think, and I want to thank not only Ofek, but also David Simantov and Ofek Guterman for their contribution. They are very much involved in that, and they deserve their gratitude for what they've done. Of course, Ofek you did such an excellent job. It's really impressive. And the vitality of the IFIS is proven by the participation of so many foreign members that contribute to this, because the idea is that we shall not just remain in our own swamp, but see what's happening in other swamps as well. And there's many similarities, and we have a lot to learn from the knowledge developed around the globe on those issues in order to be better equipped to study our own problems. And I think this has been proven again and again throughout the activities of IFIS. This year, when I look back at what you said in the beginning of this meeting about how many meetings were held and how relevant the discussions were to what bothers the intelligence communities around the globe and in Israel in particular, this is really a show of how important this initiative is. And on top of that, the effort given to the inauguration of all kinds of books that deal with the intelligence from both the side of the intelligence culture that Itai and Meir Finkel wrote about, and on we are all talking about the success of the deception of Hamas, but the success of their intelligence is not less impressive. And the book of Nati Flammer is very important in this respect. I think that we are looking forward to continuing this growth pattern next year. We have already decided together with Galia to continue this cooperation, and this is very important. And we shall be judged by how successful the next move is, not by looking backwards at what we have already accomplished. And as Galia said, I also am looking forward to the conference at next coming October. We hope that it's going to be even more successful than the first one that we held last year. And we just hope that we shall not be caught by any surprise on the way. We have already experienced that too. So thank you for everybody for participating and contributing for this successful year of IFIS. I hope that Ofek will be with us for the next year, but there's a rumor that he might be replaced. So whatever happens, IFIS stands with or without you, Ofek.
That's true.
And,
That's true.
we hope that we shall be blessed with a new successful leader in the next year, if this is going to be the case. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kupa and Galia. Like you both said, this is the work of numerous people. So Galia and Professor Leo Herman and the administrative staff, Hanoch and Sharon, and the Hebrew University side, and Kuperwasser and David Simentov and Ofer Guterman on the IICC side. And also we have a steering committee with Elena Grossfeld and Stefanie Kirchweger and Nati Flammer. So I would like to thank you all, and as a token of appreciation, I would ask you all to fill out the feedback that is just in your inbox. Feedback on the second semester, so you can find it on the WhatsApp group and your email. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you in October. Keep safe. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.